Batman has the Batmobile, Wonder Woman has her invisible plane, Green Hornet has the Black Beauty, and in 1974, Marvel came to the decision that Spider-Man should have his own car. Now, many of you would be thinking that a superhero who can swing through the city on webs in a place where traffic is horrible and most people don't drive wouldn't have need for a car. And you would be correct. But still, Marvel did it anyway. So let's take a trip back to the 70s and look at the brief time in which Spider-Man had a car. A really, really dumb car. The Spider-Mobile's history begins both in the comic books and behind the scenes with the motivation we all can relate to: money. The legendary Stan Lee decided one day that Spider-Man needed a car because toy sales make lots of money, and as the Batmobile proved after the 60s Batman TV series, cars can be great accessories for superheroes and make for great toys. So Lee decided that their most popular superhero of the time, Spider-Man, needed a car. Stories have varied on what specifically motivated Stan Lee to come to this decision, besides money. Many include Jerry Conway, the then writer of Amazing Spider-Man, who would bring this questionable idea to life, have said that Lee was approached by a toy company who said they wanted to license the rights to do a Spider-Man-themed toy car. However, there's been no definitive proof of this interaction, and while Mego did release a Spider-Man car of their own design to go with the Spider-Man toys that they made, it was not the one realized in the comics. The more likely accounts are that no one specifically contacted Stan Lee, but he was convinced if they would include a car for Spider-Man in the comics, they could make money having a toy company license the rights. Either way, Spider-Man was getting a car, and Jerry Conway was going to be the man to make it happen, whether he liked it or not, and by all accounts, he didn't like it. The main problem he seemed to have with the idea is the same one that most have with the very concept. Spider-Man, for one, lives in New York City, a city notorious for horrible traffic where most people don't drive and many don't even have a driver's license. And Spider-Man gets around the city just fine with his webbing, so a car would actually be a slower mode of travel. To Conway's credit, though, he took the obvious problem with the concept and incorporated that into the story itself. In 1973, in The Amazing Spider-Man 126, everyone's favorite wall crawler was approached by two advertisers working on behalf of Corona Motors, a fictional company, or as far as I can find out, a fictional company. No one come at me if they're real, I'm not a car person. And they wanted him to build a car using the new non-pollutant engine built by Corona Motors. Can't say Corona didn't hire advertising people who think outside the box in their ideas. Incidentally, their first names were Stan and Roy, a clear nod to Stan Lee and then editor-in-chief of Marvel, Roy Thomas. Thomas is also one of my favorite comic writers ever, which has nothing to do with Spider-Man's Spider-Mobile, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Spider-Man initially turns him down because, well, it's a dumb idea. And that's not me talking, that's what he actually said. It's something else about being responsible for the death of Norman Osborn, but mostly because it was a dumb idea, I'm sure. But when Spidey got home and found out he and roommate Harry Osborn were about to be evicted, he was motivated to go back to Stan and Roy and take them up on their offer in exchange for $1,000 cash up front. Okay, I know it was the 70s and he had bills to pay, but $1,000? Like I said, I'm not a car guy, but that would not cover the cost to build a car even in 1974. But hey, comic books, am I right? So they gave Spider-Man the $1,000 in cash that they apparently just had lying around the office. In 1974, to pay someone who doesn't build cars to build a car. Yes, it bugs me, I'm sorry. Just don't sue me for $1,000 because I sure don't have that lying around. I don't work for Corona Motors. So anyway, Spider-Man has the money, and it was now time to build a car he didn't need in the first place. Now, Peter Parker's a smart guy, but he's no auto mechanic, seeing as how he doesn't own a car. So he went to the one friend who could help him, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, who agrees because apparently a member of the Fantastic Four has nothing better going on. And the two began working on the Spider-Mobile. Their building the car was then an ongoing subplot through pretty much every issue from issue 126 all the way up until issue 130, with them working on the car being mentioned, if not shown, in every issue. Well, except for issue 129. If that sounds familiar, it's because that's the issue that introduced the world to none other than the Punisher. And given the times that book has been read and reprinted due to it being Punisher's first appearance, it's likely fortunate people have not been reading to mention the Spider-Mobile in that classic issue for the past 40 years. But in issue 130, we finally get the first appearance of the Spider-Mobile. Punisher, eat your heart out. Greeted with a quote from Spidey that I think sums it up perfectly. Now that's what I call a fiasco. Now to be fair, while I and many others dunk on this car's appearance, which is not hard to do because, well, look at it. But if I'm being honest, for the time period, and given it was made to promote and stir up interest in a potential toy, I actually think it does the job pretty good. I mean, the design is no Batmobile, but as someone who was born only a year after the story came out, I could see Dan the boy playing with and enjoying a toy car made with this design. For a toy in the 70s, it has a look that they were likely going for. For a college student in the 70s, however, it does not. And there was no real narrative to explain why Spider-Man and Johnny Storm, two college-age kids in the 70s, didn't come up with a more stylish design. I mean, I guess Peter is kind of a nerd still, but Johnny Storm? There weren't any requirements given to him for the car besides to use the engine provided, so even if it was an unnecessary vehicle, I think they'd want to make it look a little bit flashier or sexier or something like that. But while it didn't make much sense in the narrative, Marvel and Conway were not afraid to acknowledge the ridiculousness of the whole thing, and that it really didn't make sense. From the silly design to the fact there was literally no need for it. And Storm and Peter Parker both had many jokes at its expense. The car, however, did have some interesting gadgets to it, as all superhero cars should. It had a seat ejector, which was as unnecessary as the car, but as Torch explained, all superhero vehicles should have seat ejectors. It also had a spider signal, just like Spider-Man had on his belt, and I never actually saw a reason to have it there either, but at least it was consistently unnecessary in this case. It also had web shooters, and what was my favorite feature, it could transform into a more unassuming car when parked, in order to camouflage in public. After all, Spider-Man's broke. He doesn't have a spider cave. However, the problems were not over, as Spider-Man, as I mentioned, is a lifelong New Yorker who is always broke, so he never learned how to drive. Although he seems to learn after a quick lesson from Johnny Storm, but I'll give them credit for acknowledging the reality Peter Parker would not realistically know how to drive a car, and let it go that he apparently learned really fast how to drive a car. The Spider-Mobile gets its first chance at action a couple of days later when Spidey uses it to capture some henchmen of the villain Hammerhead, before Hammerhead quickly immobilizes the car. But hey, it stops some second-rate henchmen, which is something, I guess. After losing the fight to Hammerhead, the police showed up mocking Spider-Man's car before he stops him from hauling it away as he needs it for the rent money, and he takes one more jab at it while he does. And I should take this time to mention that I find it funny how the comic acknowledges the ridiculousness of the entire thing because, well, it is ridiculous on so many levels. But I am a little surprised that Leon Ordway let Jerry Conway get away with going down on the car so hard and making it mostly ineffective to boot. If this was made to set up a possible toy tie-in, it seems a bit counterproductive to both mention over and over how dumb the car is, and also have Spider-Man hate to even have to deal with it. Wouldn't seem like something that would have made many kids want to rush out and buy their own Spider-Mobile when their hero Spider-Man hates it the most of all. But given that Marvel was well aware of how many teens and older readers were reading comics at the time, and even in the 70s it slowly started writing more for that audience, I guess they figured there was no way that those readers would buy an adult would drive that thing aside from desperation and monetary incentive. After this, the car was retired until it reappeared in issue 141. Spider-Man brought it out hoping that it would somehow be useful against the Jackal, a Spider-Man foe was plaguing him during this time. After bringing it out, he ended up being pursued by the police. He evaded them, but due to a trick from the villain Mysterio, ended up driving it off a pier immediately after that. The following issue briefly showed Spidey looking for it, but the car was at the bottom of the ocean, and at that point he was unable to get it back out. That's where it should have probably stayed, but shortly after this, Len Wein took over writing duties for Spider-Man, and apparently he couldn't help himself, and the Spider-Mobile came out for one more appearance, arguably its biggest one. In Amazing Spider-Man 159, it was revealed that the Spider-Man villain Tinker had fished the Spider-Mobile out of the river and repaired and modified it. To what end, you might ask? Well, in the service of his employer, who was eventually revealed to be Kingpin, with the intent to turn the car into a weapon designed to kill Spidey. I think it would have been easier to invent some kind of gun, but I'm not an evil inventor now, am I? Spider-Man then faced off against his own car, complicated by a gas Tinker devised that clogged his pores and plugged his web shooters, thus making him unable to stick to walls or use his webbing. The car actually did a good job facing off against its former master, but once it brought Spider-Man to the Tinker, he was unsurprisingly able to defeat him and his muscle-headed assistant Toy. The car destroyed the process, Spidey delivered it to the advertising people at Corona Motors, and I'm sure he was more than happy to let him have it. Thus ended the silly saga of the Spider-Mobile. Well, mostly. In Spider-Man 600, over 30 years later, a fun little callback to the Spider-Mobile happened when Peter Parker ran across a replica of it in the Smithsonian, with onlookers giving it the respect it deserved. Deadpool also eventually got it back and turned it into his own car, repainting it and giving it the name the Dead Buggy. Several alternate history and imaginary stories have also had versions of the Spider-Mobile appear, helping keep its legacy alive over the years. So was the car a success with Marvel? Well, at least in terms of the reason it was created, the answer is no. While Mego did produce a couple of toy cars for the Spider-Man figure, it was not the version from the comic book. So Stan's hope of licensing the Spider-Mobile proved all for nothing. But don't feel too bad, he found other ways to make money for Marvel, and for himself. But likely due to the pure silliness of it, the Spider-Mobile's legend has continued to live on. And in 2017, Hot Wheels did actually release a Spider-Mobile Hot Wheels car. 40 years and change later, Marvel finally got their Spider-Mobile toy. So yes, the Spider-Mobile was a goofy idea, formed out of a desire to make money, not tell a compelling story. But something about it found a way to reach people and let its legacy live on. So in that way, it eventually was redeemed. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to check out some of my other videos on some obscure events in comic book history. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. I'm Dan the Man, and I'll see you next time.